Hello and welcome to the show and welcome to 2026. Happy New Year. Good to see you all. Happy Christmas. It is still Christmas season for those of you who observe the church calendar. We are still celebrating. The tree stays up till Epiphany because that's just how we do it in this house. But Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. And thank you for coming along. We've now been doing this for about a year. This is the 1 year anniversary of this show. So, but it's a great episode 46. Been going a while. For a new nobility, we're going to discuss noblesse oblige. And I am Jeffrey Scott, and I am joined, as always, by my friend Sean. Sean, how are you, man?
Things are good. This year I did not keep the tree up till Epiphany. I put it back in the attic the weekend after Christmas. I was ready
Taking up too much room. It just had to go.
Yeah, I was ready.
Yeah, that's all right. That's all right. But we are joined this week by a good friend, an old friend, a fellow traveler. We've run into each other on the interwebs back and forth. But BJ Newman is a pastor at Little Miami Fellowship in Xenia, Ohio. Is that correct? Xenia, Ohio?
That's correct. Yep.
And he writes interesting things on Facebook every once in a while. If you ever want to ponder, have a good thought. There's a couple of friends that I recommend to people. One is Adam White, and the other is BJ Newman, because he's going to put something out there that's going to make you thunk a little bit, going to make you scratch your head. But he had a Facebook post about noblesse oblige, and it's a topic that's been discussed a bit. But what is noblesse oblige? What does it mean? Who are the nobles, and what are their obligations to whom? But BJ, if you want to give us a little bit of a definition there, if you could,
Sure.
please.
Yeah, I mean the short and simple definition is simply those who are in positions of nobility or positions of rank. I'm a good Westminster Presbyterian, so we use the language of rank. And if you have a position of rank or a position of nobility, then that means you have obligations or duties to those who are under your care or under your oversight. And the scope of what that looks like depends on your position. And the brief defense of this is that it simply comes right out of the fifth commandment. The fifth commandment says to honor your father and mother, and that as a father and mother, you also have duties to your children. So there's a familial obligation that is born into your circumstance, right? You don't choose it. And depending on where you move in society, right? It's true if you're a baseball coach at a local little league team. It's true if you're the king of, a great empire, and everywhere in between. But just the simple idea is I have an obligation to do right by the people who are underneath me. And I'll add one more biblical footnote here. I think this is what Jesus was really getting at when he talked about the language of servant leadership. Now, of course, in our egalitarian feminist days, that has been bastardized to mean basically husbands have to do dishes. I don't know how that thing, but right. The key of what Jesus is saying is these pagan leaders use their leadership to extract from their people for their own benefit. And you, as a Christian leader, are supposed to be different. You're supposed to lead well. You're supposed to have skills, talents, and abilities in leadership so that you make their lives better. It doesn't mean that you become a servant. It means that you serve them by leading. And I think that's sort of the quintessential, that's the fountainhead, so to speak, of noblesse oblige.
Right. And that is a good point that you make about servant leadership. I mean, that's kind of the question going around right now is, are you leading by serving, or are you serving by leading? Because leading by serving doesn't, it can be misunderstood. There is a proper way to understand it, but it can be very easily misunderstood to be, well, I'm in charge. That's why I let everybody walk all over me. Whereas serving by leading is a much more understood concept, which is my duty is to lead. and it comes with rights and obligations.
Right.
So, like you were saying, the nobles have these obligations, but they also, they also get the cream of the crop, as it were. So it's a two-edged sword, and the street runs both ways.
I think the obligation thing is kind of lost in today's, especially today's America. That if you're in leadership, like say Congress, which isn't even supposed to necessarily be a leadership position, but that's a discussion for another day, I guess. But now, if you're in Congress, you just like sit back and do a bunch of insider trading and have like impossible market gains that nobody in history has ever had. Like that's how we think of in America. Oh, well, that's what leadership is you just reap all these benefits. But in reality, there in history, there's a situation that's sort of like a heavy lies the crown kind of position, where it's like, well, somebody's got to do it. I don't want to do it. Like, I don't want to be king. I don't want the sword of Damocles over my head. For those who don't know, Jeff, do you want to? You've told this story well in the past. The sword of Damocles, what that is.
Yeah. So Damocles was a king who had a very good friend who always seemed envious of his position. He'd talk about, oh, well, you're the king, and it's great when you're the king. You don't have any of these problems, as he's discoursing with his friend. And Damocles told his friend one day, well, why don't you spend a day as the king? I'll let you sit in my throne. You can be in charge. You can say whatever you want. You will say go, and someone will go. You can say fetch, and someone will fetch. And so he's like, yeah, he jumps at the opportunity to be king for a day. And he sits in the throne. It's very luxurious. He's got, surrounded by wise men and beautiful women, everything that a man could want, right? And he looks up, and above him, suspended by an infinitely small thread from the ceiling, is a sword, which looks at any moment like the string might just break and fall and just cut him in half. And so the whole time he's really suffering to enjoy this day as king, which he has been given, because he just keeps looking up at this sword. And he talked to the king after the day is up, and he's like, it was wonderful, but what's with the sword? And he said, the sword is the opportunity that everyone has to take you out. And I'm paraphrasing a bit here. But he said, that is your neighbors who want to come and pillage your lands. That is intriguers in the castle who want to cut your head off. That is people who want to steal your wife, people who want to steal your gold. That is all of the threats that you endure as king, and all of the obligations that you have towards your people. Constant threat to be king. Yes, it's nice. You get all of the nice trappings, all of the fine clothes. But all of the responsibility also rests on you. So, yeah, that is the sword of Damocles.
Yeah, I just want to throw that in because I think that historically it's a very different understanding of what it means to be nobility. I mean, we don't really have nobility in America. I mean, we had talked before the show about, I don't know if you want to get to this later, but like kind of what we had instead of like formal royalty in the colonies, at least early on in America. Was that something you want to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, I want before we get into that, I want to talk about some examples of noblesse oblige from Europe. So, I mean, before we get too into it, I just want to say there, lay out some of the understanding. In Europe, when you had, nobles and peasants and this relation that they had with each other, the way it worked was the nobles owned the land and you lived on it and you worked it. And to a liberal mindset, to a modern man, that sounds almost like slavery, right? It's like, hey, what do you mean I don't own the land I live on? What do you mean I don't own the house that I live in? The wood that the house is made out of doesn't belong to me. That's that sounds like rent seeking, right? It sounds like some slumlord who's seized all of the livable conditions around you, and now he charges you money to live on them. But it wasn't like that. It wasn't quite like that. It was very different. The land was owned by nobility, and it was transmitted hereditarily. You couldn't, in most cases, just go and buy land. The instances where you bought land was usually at the end of a war. When you're settling terms for your peace treaties, and you're like, okay, the new lines are drawn here. I'm going to have this land now in perpetuity, and I'm going to have so much gold, or you're going to have so much gold. We're going to wheel and deal over the barrel head at the end of this battle, and we're going to find out how we're going to come to terms. But the land was owned by a family. It wasn't owned by an individual either. When we think of landlords, landlords tend to be one person, right? Or maybe a group of 5 people in a firm somewhere, off in Dallas, who you never hear about. They just send out an inspector every once in a while, and they just collect rent, right? But the land was owned by a family, right? And people who have watched Game of Thrones, or Braveheart, any of these historically themed movies, you'll see how there's a family dynamic, right? There's intrigue even within the family household, because somebody's got to end up with the responsibility for what happens to the land, what happens to the armies, what happens to the buildings, the crops. And in Europe throughout the Middle Ages, especially right at the beginning, the land was owned by petty kings. And these kings ruled with an iron hand, because they had to. If they didn't, the sword of Damocles would fall. And so they had these small territories that they ruled over. They told people when to plant the crops. They told people when to harvest the crops and where to store the food, what we were going to trade, with whom we were going to trade, what kind of textiles were going to be processed, and things along those lines, because they were managing essentially a household economy in a larger household area. It wasn't like the United States, which is a massive multi-million, 300 million people living here. These were kingdoms with 1,000 people or so, and you were managing it like a man runs his household. I mean, Sean, when you run your household, do you determine, what kind of things you're going to grow in the garden, what kind of animals you're going to have, what kind of groceries you're going to buy? It's like,
I tend to delegate that to my secretary.
The family, right, makes this whole, it's not, you might have a petty king who's ultimately in charge of it all, but there's a lot of delegation, and there's a lot of sharing of responsibility. But you don't let the neighbors tell you.
Right. Well, we were just talking before the show. Like I've said a million times, like I'm on my back patio, so my wife is walking through this room to get to the backyard, and she's going to make sure that we have like an automatic gate that not an automatic gate, it's an automatic door for the chickens, and so we have to go there at night to make sure that the coop is closed and that all the chickens got in, all that kind of stuff, because we've got something like 16 chickens. But she came back in and she's like, oh, we got a dead chicken. And it's like, well, there you go. Like there's but she went and she's a tough broad, so she went and handled it, and that was cool. I mean, but I guess that's my answer, is that a lot of things is just delegate to my wife.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not one of those
delegate, guys. That's
I'm not one
like
of those
they're
guys
micromanaging everything.
I'm very much not a micromanager. I go and I have my job, I do all that stuff, and I trust my wife enough to be able to handle the home economics, if you will.
One might say that your heart does safely trust her.
Yeah, there you
go. Sounds familiar. But BJ, in this post that you made, I want to go ahead and pull it up and share the screen for people, and I'm going to read it off. And then when we get done with the post that you made on Facebook, I want, if we could, to get a little bit of commentary from you on especially the top comment. But here it is. BJ Newman, December 18th, posted, when the medieval kings and feudal lords ruled in Christian Europe, they were governed by a deep-seated concept known as noblesse oblige. Those who were privileged through wealth, power, or status were expected to treat those of lower status with generosity and nobility. There were certainly outliers who did not do this well, but it was enforced and expected in every acre of the nation, and it ruled the moral sentiments of the continent for a millennium. The peasants were expected to honor those of higher estate, and the elites were expected to act in ways that benefited those under their charge. Now that liberalism has made everybody equal, wink, wink, that concept is gone. In fact, we now have the opposite. It took a few generations for it to disappear. Ethics didn't shift quickly, but our current elites in the Western world embody a perverse mirror to this. They operate with a plutocratic exploitation, a predatory elitism. The old concept was driven by God-ordained reality of the imago Dei. They embodied Jesus' call to servant leadership. They led well and sacrificed themselves for the benefit of their family, community, and nation. The new is undergirded by social Darwinism. They see their privilege as proof of moral superiority. They are the spoiled children of history who will bring down their family, community, and nation and expect them to sacrifice for their decadence. Nearly every social and cultural problem we experience today is downwind of this fundamental shift in how our elites rule. There will always be elites, as there will always be the poor. As long as our national leaders sow disdain for their people, we will continue to reap dysfunction in society. So there we go, the loss of noblesse oblige. And any comments before we get to the top comment, Sean or BJ?
Yeah, well, I mean, if BJ's got something to say, though.
Yeah, let me just add, spin off of something that Sean said earlier, where it's the dirty word in this conversation is obligation, which I think it's hilarious that you have obligation respecter in your name. We have so fixated in the West on rights and freedoms and privileges that we've just lost any sense that there's an obligation. And when I discovered that, when I as I was thinking through this and I kind of came to terms with that, this is when I gave up any real notion of being a libertarian, because as libertarianism goes, it is the individual that is the center of all social gravity. It is the individual who makes, conscious decisions to, they can obligate themselves if they want, but they're free to do so. But the Bible doesn't think that way. The Bible speaks in a way where we're born with obligations. We're born with duties, and we have just simply lost that whole, that whole project of saying, wherever you were born, whatever the conditions you were born in, you still have duties and obligations. Now, the nature of those duties and obligations can shift and change depending on circumstances, right? We're supposed to honor our father and mother, but if we have negligent or abusive fathers or mothers, then they lose that privilege and they lose, that duty is no longer on us. But the fact of the matter is that duty goes all the way up. I mean, you guys, as you're talking about this, danced back and forth between the household and the kingdom. And it's because one is an outgrowth of the other, right? One of the things I have spent a lot of time in our church plant talking about, we went through Genesis 1, 2, and 3, and we called the series Let Us Make Man. And what we did was we focused on what does it mean to be a human? The reason we don't know what a woman is because we don't know what a human is or what a human is for. And as we walked through that, one of the points that I made over and over was the center of gravity when it comes to society is not the individual, it's the family. Now, out of the family comes the individual, right? We get our first names, we get our own identities, we get our own tastes, and we get our own desires, and we go. but that's all given. There's so much that is given to us that comes with strings attached. And the modern American, the modern Westerner hates that. They hate obligations. And that's why I think we have leaders who feel the same way. It's unreal that in the wake of me writing this post, this whole debacle in Minnesota gets unveiled. That's exactly what I'm talking about. It's been going on in Columbus, by the way, in my backyard for 10 years, and it's an open secret. But that's what I'm talking about. That's the inverse of noblesse oblige. And depending on how far you guys want to go down this rabbit hole, I fundamentally blame liberalism as a political project for why we are where we are. I know that's a long discussion, but I just wanted to put that out.
Yeah, well, I do want to unpack that, because liberalism as a thought process, as a whole world interpreting device, is very far reaching. And goldfish don't know that they're wet, and modern Americans don't know that they are fundamentally liberal people.
That's right, 100%.
And if you walk into Walmart and you tell the old man with a gray beard and an American flag T-shirt and working man's jeans, if you said, "You, sir, are a liberal," I mean, that he's going to slap you down, right?
Yeah.
He's going to come up with knuckles, and he's going to want to fight, because to him, when you say you're a liberal, what he's hearing is you want higher taxes, and you're pro-abortion, and I hate that, so I'm not a liberal. But when we say liberal, we're not talking about the Republican versus Democrat talking points, which change every 8 years. The positions which seem to move ever farther to the wrong, with no apparent brakes on the train. What we're talking about is a whole world understanding mindset of people who believe fundamentally that human beings do not have obligations, that they are born free.
That's right.
Of duties. And it starts with duties to kings, and it ends with duties to parents, and duties, it starts with duties to kings, it goes to duties to society, then duties to an employer, and eventually you have modern liberalism, which is the child of her own mother. It's not gone astray. This is the logical result. Children do not belong to parents. Children don't owe their parents respect. The state can take them away and give them to somebody else, and it doesn't matter, and it doesn't hurt anything, because we are fundamentally all interchangeable pieces, each one unique, and yet every single one the same.
Yeah. I had an interesting conversation. So in about 2 weeks, we're going to be celebrating our 1-year anniversary at Little Miami. And, rewind the clock a year at our launch service. I preached on Isaiah 6, and the opening phrase is, "In the year that King Uzziah died." And King Uzziah was a beloved king, served for 50 years. And afterwards, I had an Iranian man who is a part of our church plant. He's most likely he's an ordained PCA elder, and he's most likely going to end up coming on board with us. But he came up to me and he said, "BJ, I don't think any of your people understood the gravity of that opening statement, in the year that King Uzziah died." He said he grew up under the Shah, and he was right. I mean, he's honest enough to say the Shah was not perfect, but he left as a result of the the revolution, which, as we speak, maybe Iran may be falling back into the hands of the Shah, or a descendant of the Shah as we speak. I don't know. I'm not making any predictions, but the reason I bring that up is because he said Israel would have been despondent because their father died. He's like, king is like their father. It's the father of their nation. And we just don't think that way at all. Like when our former presidents die, people are like, it's a good opportunity for me to take a social media picture or something, or take a vacation trip to go there or whatever. There's no like mourning. And it's because, in the same way that they don't see that they have obligations to us, we don't feel that we have any obligations to them. And I say that we are all worse off because of it.
I will say, in I don't want this to be like too much of an opposition to what you're saying, but I remember I was in high school when Ronald Reagan died.
Oh, okay.
And I was in California at the time, and Ronald Reagan was governor of California. So, there were many reasons that people in that area would love him. Either they were Republican or they just remembered him as governor of California. So he was a beloved guy in that area. And it felt like the flags were at half mast for like 6 months.
Interesting.
When he died. I don't know what the official timeline is on that, but that was the first time. Like, what do you know off the top of your heads, like how long flag code says it's supposed to be at half mast for? Because with Jimmy Carter, it felt like it was when Jimmy Carter died recently. It felt like it was maybe a week, something like that. Right. I think when Dick Cheney died, I didn't even see social media posts about when Dick Cheney died.
Yeah.
The only social media posts I saw were dancing crabs and orange hunting vests, which
orange hunting vests. That's funny.
Very poor taste, but still kind of funny. But I remember when Reagan died, and it was in 2004. It was the year before we came back to the States. I was 10 at the time, and it is interesting because Sean, like you're saying, it felt like a big moment in California. And I was an Army brat. I grew up on and around military bases. We were all big oorah, big followers of Reagan. But I think Reagan's kind of the exception to the rule here because he is really the father of the new America. Ever since the Cold War, he is the father of America in the way that BJ is talking about. A king is a father. But I still remember being 10 years old, watching this in AFIS on 25 TVs on the wall, watching the funeral procession and just being like, I don't know who that is, but I guess it's important. And
I remember it was. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, but it was like a grown up. My parents were very heavily moved. My mother was very touched. She was crying at watching Reagan's funeral. My dad was noticeably disturbed, which to him means a lot because he's a pretty hard old soldier. But, so I knew it was a big deal. But when you have somebody who is a proper king, like even the little children know who he is. And just the fact that presidents are president for so short of a period of time, it makes it to where there's this almost respectable, healthy distance between me and the public. I'm not a real king. I'm just a Mr. President. And when we get into liberal, maybe this is a good off ramp into talking about liberalism, because really the office of president was an exercise in dodging responsibility from the very beginning. The people came to a man who had just won a war for independence from a wildly inappropriate, overboard parliament. And they said, you be our king. The last king couldn't protect us from his insane parliament. You be our king. And he said, no, I can't do that. I'm just going to be president for 8 years, and then I'm just going to go tend to my cabbages. And, that was a result of liberalism. The ideas of liberalism had taken full root in the Americas. And that president office was born out of this idea that, this responsibility that he had to these people, this nation who were functionally his children, that he could just leave it 8 years later and be like, okay, I'm done. Wash my hands of you. I'm done.
That's an interesting read of the George Washington. He's usually hailed as the new Cincinnatus for stepping away.
But was Cincinnatus right for stepping away?
I don't know. You got me thinking. So I will say this. One of the dynamics that are at play is that this whole idea of duties and obligations and hierarchy and rank are built into human nature. We will never shed, right?
Mm-hmm.
So my major concern is not that we return to some monarchy. Honestly, I mean, I would argue that that's what the Bible teaches is monarchy. It's the natural outworking of the family. But from
our previous work,
from a prudential standpoint, I'm just not sure that's going to work in America given our history.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so, but the fact of the matter is, what liberalism teaches is egalitarianism at base. It basically says, and that's why I said wink, wink, everybody's equal. And we all know that this is not the truth. And in fact, there are very few places in modern American culture where that's still kind of worn on our sleeve. Mm-hmm. I mean, I grew up in a context where I played a lot of sports. And so you had to earn your spot on the team, right? Competition, performance, even if you managed to get a spot on the field, you still had to perform. And so I do think athletics is one of the places where hierarchy is still kind of, accepted. And then I joined the military.
Fundamentally necessary. Yeah.
100%. Yeah. And then I went and joined the military. And now I'm in the Air Force where we literally wear our rank on our sleeve. So I've always been very comfortable with rank and hierarchy. But I think that's the problem, is that most people really despise the idea of hierarchy. They don't like the idea that there are ranks. They don't like the idea that there are people who are in stations of life that are above them. And I mean, I guess on one hand, I want to just tell them, like, I'm sorry, it's just, you can't deny reality.
But I also, suck it up, buttercup.
Right. Yeah. But on the other hand, I want to persuade them that hierarchy embraced and done well is good. I mean, if you look at the etymology of the word hierarchy, it is hieros arche. Literally, it means sacred order or sacred rule, something like that. And it's the idea that there's a structure to the human society that if we adopt it, will be good for us. And we all just intuitively understand that if you put the smart people in charge and they have good character, they're going to do better. If you put the strong people in positions where they can, I always joke, you don't ask the 70-year-old lady to, shovel the snow off the church parking lot, right? You get the young guys that, they may not be the smartest, but they got strong backs. Right? Put them where they need to go, right? And just recognizing that hierarchy is both God-given and good is something that if I can accomplish anything in my ministry, if it's that, I will have succeeded.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's I mean, like, you're talking about hierarchy. I mean, everyone knows that the Army is cooler than the Air Force, right? Like, that's not something that's just like built into.
But I mean, just look at the ASVAB scores. Tell everything you need to know.
Yeah. No, that it's funny you say, because like when I went and did the ASVAB, I got a 92 was my overall, nice. And I want to say my GT was like a 130 something. Maybe high 120s. But the Air Force recruiters were like, dude, don't join the Army. Those guys are idiots. Like, you could be with us. And anyways, that was a whole I've talked about.
You get a lot of the cool toys though.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
You know what the cool don't just get to load them, you actually get to use them.
That's right.
Yeah. Can I just say, like, a cool toy that we had that blew my mind? We had a thing, it was like a PA system for the trucks, and it would play, it was like a psychological warfare thing, and it would play different sounds outside of the truck to like upset the natives, I guess. Like, so it, like, one of the tracks on it was like a baby crying.
Oh man.
And then one of them, this is what stuck with me. One of the tracks was Leanne Rimes singing the national anthem. And I thought, like, dude, how funny would that have been to just be like driving in Afghanistan, playing Leanne Rimes singing the Star Spangled Banner? Like, that would just be insane.
Psychological warfare at its finest.
Yeah, for sure. But you had mentioned earlier that social Darwinism in the context of people saying, like, well, there's only me and my decisions and what I can do for myself. And if I feel like it, I can do this other thing. How connected would you say that is to like capitalism? Because what you're describing right there is like Ayn Rand to a T.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And her whole thing was like, capitalism is moral because I don't have obligations to other people. So like, how would you address that?
I think you are spot on in identifying Ayn Rand as sort of the quintessential example of why I don't want to call myself a capitalist. Now, stop. Don't clip that out.
No. Don't backtrack now.
I'm not
Are you
backtracking.
saying you're a national
Full steam ahead.
I'm not a socialist at all. Not even close. Not even a little bit.
Yeah.
Socialism is awful. So the reason I highlight it is because the economic system intertwines with this idea of noblesse oblige, in the sense that the people who are wealthy, either through position or either through business or through inheritance or whatever, they still have the same obligation to make sure that they're treating their workers well, to make sure that they're taking care of, again, the people underneath them. So I'm absolutely a free market guy. I absolutely believe that, it's really the government trying to implement all of these things when it comes to making shirts or whatever. Like, I don't know, the fewer, fewer of these sorts
regulations,
of
the better.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's exactly right. But where it intersects is this: if you just take the globe and say every human being that exists is now competing with each other as individuals, that's the social Darwinism applied to economics. And that's what many Ayn Rand type thinkers absolutely endorse. That's why they want open borders. They want global free trade. And so I would tend to want to call, this is maybe not a good title. I don't know what to call myself, but I like a lot of what I've read about distributism, however you say it. G.K. Chesterton was one of the guys that advocated for something like that. But I like something like an economic nationalism, where I am going to earn money as a father and I'm going to benefit my family. And then beyond that, I'm going to benefit my community. And then beyond that, I'm going to benefit, my church, my city, my state, my nation. And those who are at the top, the Elon Musks of the world, should have an obligation to say, I'm going to take care of those people. And this is really the fight we're having over the border. If the global free trade dog is the head, the global free movement of labor is the tail. The reason there's so many people trying to get here, aside from the scams, I mean, that's obviously a problem, but like the reason so many people are wanting to come here is because it's cheaper labor. They're just coming for cheap labor. And the government's like, oh, you want cheap labor? I want votes. Let's get in bed together. And that's what we're up against. So anyway,
when it's a bit of an aside, but the whole border issue, one of the reasons nothing ever happens is because it's not a right versus left issue.
That's right.
Because the left wants to demographically displace the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant base of the nation. And then the right, which is owned primarily by big business, wants cheap labor. And for lack of a better descriptor, brown workers don't get paid as much as white workers. And so they want to import brown workers. And it's an inhuman method that they have.
It's awful. It's awful.
Of looking at these people. They don't see the Hispanic individual coming over the border as a human being who has aspirations, dreams, family, duties. They see him as an economic token that they can pay less money to and get just as much labor out of. And it's an inhuman. It's an anti-human agenda.
It is atrocious on all levels, to the native population that is being displaced and to the immigrant. I mean, it's a great example of what I'm talking about, where we've lost this noblesse oblige. It benefits the elites, the masses be damned. So
yeah, because it's not good for the as it were, to use the illustration, it's not good for the brown worker to be being paid less.
Yeah.
He's a de facto second-class citizen. And it's not good for the white worker to be competing with someone who can be paid less, because now you're breeding a hostile resentment between
Yeah,
them.
that's right.
So there's no noblesse oblige, there's no obligation from those on high to the people under them. Instead, it behooves them to create conflict
Yeah.
among the people beneath them.
Amen.
Because if you can create that conflict, who's going to profit? You are. You,
Yeah.
as the business owner, stand to profit from that conflict.
Well, and you were asking earlier about examples, and I think the one that sticks out, there's dozens or many more we can use, but the one that I've always found the most fascinating is King Louis IX in France, and he's the one who became Saint Louis, after which the city St. Louis was named. But what he is well known for is being a king who basically said, I'm going to establish rule over my subordinate nobles and basically say no corruption. So the way that he enforced it, he was like, a lot of people will point to the fact that he built hospitals, he formed all these charities, he basically did all sorts of giving to the poor. I mean, he was just well known for saying the peasants in my land are going to be taken care of. But the way he did it was by saying to the subordinate nobles, you don't get to abuse your people. You have to take care of them. And I think that's a great example. I mean, they'll also point to the fact that he lived a very humble, austere kind of life himself. He didn't walk around and
ascetic.
Yeah. I mean, he wasn't a full-blown ascetic, but he lived modestly.
He moved that direction.
Yeah. And
certainly much more than you or I.
Yeah. Well, and that post that we're talking about was inspired by a similar story.
Actually, that's exactly where I was going here.
Let's go there then.
Top comment. B.J. Newman, the author, says this post was brought to you by Good King Wenceslas. I read this past week during worship, and I can't stop thinking about the goodness of that spirit. So, first off, BJ, I have heard the song sung by Bing Crosby. Right, it's been a part of Christmas tradition in my house, since I was a kid. Good King Wenceslas, look, it's a jolly, jovial, it's just a very fun seasonal song.
Yeah.
But I had no inkling that this at all was a true story, or that there was really anything going on other than a king being like, hey, let's get some food and let's get some fire and let's warm this guy up. So, BJ, do you want to give us would you be willing to give us the story of King Wenceslas just quickly in your own words?
Yeah. Well, so the song, I think, takes a few liberties. It's based on a guy named he's a Duke Wenceslas. He never actually became a king, but he was a duke. He was a duke in Bohemia who embodied this noblesse oblige extraordinarily well. I mean, it's what happens. So, Duke Wenceslas and King Louis IX are what happens when you have godly men who take rule. There's all these fights about, do we want our nation to be a Christian nation? And I'm like, I want good rulers who love God, who worship Christ, because we will be better that way. I try to just tell people this isn't a power grab. Yeah, we will be benefited by that. That's right. And so the story that the song that everybody knows is basically, it's not like I don't think it's a historically accurate event. It's a moral tale for what he was like.
Right.
But
it's a summary of his life, an example of what he was like. Yeah,
that's right. But he was well known for spending time with peasants. He was well known for saying, I'm not too good to get into your presence. And, you can call that populism. You can call it whatever you want. It's just good leadership,
Yeah, that's funny that you say populism, because I remember there being there's a picture of, it was Donald Trump during, I want to say, the election season running up to his first term. So the 2015-ish campaign trail. And he he goes to this. It's this veteran who didn't have any arms. Like he lost his arms or something. So he had like prosthetics. Like you could see it. It wasn't like it was just like his arms were hidden. And Trump went up and like put his hand like on the guy's face, like kind of like a, you know, like not like he's slapping him or something, but like a touching, like, hey. And the comments that I saw on that was, you know, people would reshare it, but with like, this is the kind of man he is. And they would just say like, you know, he could see in that moment that this guy didn't have any arms, obviously. But he still wanted to have a connection with the guy.
Yeah.
And so
it's not the same to touch his robotic prosthetic hand.
Yeah.
So
yeah. He's like
human touch.
Right. And so like that, at least in the beginning, was Donald Trump. I thought Donald Trump embodied that in a lot of ways. Even when he went on Joe Rogan during this latest thing, his big thing, he wanted to ask Joe Rogan, hey, what do you think about this UFC fighter? And it was funny because like Joe Rogan had to like fight the urge to indulge common man thing. He's like, no, I want to talk about presidency and politics or whatever.
Yeah.
But Donald Trump was like, no, man, I attend all the UFC events and I want to see this. And he showed up at UFC events as president.
Right. Yeah. And that's something I've noticed too, is a mark of a great man, is that he's always interested in other people's expertise. And I find that people themselves are interesting. People are per se interesting. You can sit there and talk about yourself, but nobody really wants to hear about that. But if you can get them talking about the things that they care about and the things that they hold dear, like going on Joe Rogan's show and talking about Joe Rogan's expertise, fighting. It's like that, you know, the fact that he can do that with Joe Rogan, he can go on someone else's show and talk with them about their area of expertise. He's the everyman's man, because what it comes down to is he cares about them. He wants to talk about the things that Joe likes because he cares about Joe. He wants to talk about the things that, you know, Howard or Bill or Steve, you know, whoever it is he's with that day, he wants to talk about the things that person is interested in because he cares about that person. And essentially what noblesse oblige kind of presupposes is that you care about the people under you. You care about the obligations you have to them because they are your people. They are, as it were, your family, extended family, or, you know, tribe, whatever you want to call it. But these people are your people, you know, our guys, so to speak. And you care about them because of that. And that's not what we have today. You know, Donald Trump is a depart from the norm. Most of the time when you see, you know, one of the reasons it was so jarring to see Donald Trump talking about Joe's interests with Joe is because if you see a politician go on to, you know, his press tour, what's the thing he's got to talk about? Well, he's got to sell himself to the audience. You know, this very capitalist idea of democracy where it's like, I'm a salesman, you know, I'm a used car salesman in a nicely tailored suit. And I'm going to tell you how you need to purchase me because I'm going to make your life better. It's capitalism of the leadership, and it's corrupting.
Yeah, I mean, there's a tension here, I think, to keep in mind. I mean, there's always the running joke, you know, you can vote for a president that you can imagine having a beer with. And that's effectively what we're talking about. Can he relate to the normal guy? Mm-hmm. Well, for the viewers out there, I apologize. I've been fighting a little bit of a cold, so my throat's a little rough today.
Well, we appreciate you coming on nonetheless.
No, love it. I'm glad you guys are talking about this stuff. So, I mean, reality is when you're the president of a nation of 350 million people, right, you can't meet everybody. You can't know everybody. It's impossible. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But part of what the aristocrats of old the people who were intended to be the elites and were trained to be the elites, part of their training at home was just learning how to have normal conversations, right? They would get the elite education. They would have the privilege. They would stay in the palace. They would eat the king's food.
Yeah.
But they would also
learn Latin and Greek.
Yeah. I mean, and all of that is good. I mean, if I remember my Greek correctly, aristos means the best. It means like the top. And it's like, so you're being ruled by the best. But
in theory,
in theory, yeah, right. That's right. And part of their training would have been to say, you need to make sure that you have obligations to these people, but you can go spend time with them. And oftentimes it would be around things like hunting or sports or, those kinds of things. And I mean, I think it's really healthy to have leaders who know what the average person's experience is like, because the reality is they're not going to experience it much. And that's okay. I mean, just the reality of things. But this is why I think too, the old pattern was you prove yourself from the bottom up. Okay, you want to go be a good mayor, you have to prove yourself to being a good father, right? You go then prove yourself to be a good mayor, you go prove yourself to be good at the next tier up, and then maybe if God sees fit, he'll make you king. But it's like you prove yourself at the lower level and move up. In my church world, this is one of the reasons we put such a heavy emphasis on fathers managing their household well. It's if you have a difficult time communicating the gospel to your children, to your wife, and managing your household, then man, you're bringing some dysfunction into the church potentially. And I know it's not always black and white, but that's why that principle is there. Well, that principle is the same in politics as well. The principle is the same really in any leadership. If you can't do lower level leadership, you can't do upper level leadership.
Why would you expect that?
Yeah, exactly right.
For bookkeeping purposes, I guess, how long are you able to hang out?
I mean, I don't know how long you guys anticipated sticking around, but
we've gone like 3.5 hours with people before, so that's why I asked that, because I know that Jeff in particular wanted to get to these comments, and then we've got a couple of comments in our own comment section. So I just want to make sure that we're.
But in theory, it's an hour-long show, but it tends to run more like 2 hours.
Okay.
But we have gone as much as 3.5. But those are the exception, not the rule.
Sure. Well, I have worship in the morning and I have to preach, so I probably better not do 3 hours. But let's dive on in then. Yeah.
So let's Sean, good point. Let's hit the comment section here in the back channel on the stream, and then we'll get to the comments on Facebook underneath your post here. So this is Zoltan says, the somewhat archaic response, much obliged, holds a lot if you unpack it versus you are welcome. Yeah. I mean, the idea that you are obliged to somebody carries connotations, right? Yeah. Whereas you're welcome, just means, I'm giving you this of myself. There's no strings.
I give you permission. I give you permission to do the thing you just did to me.
It's funny because much obliged was a very common thing that I heard growing up. I grew up in Appalachian, Ohio, little town called Portsmouth. And it was not uncommon for me to hear somebody say, "Oh, much obliged."
Yeah. I mean, here in Central Texas, where I'm from, you would hear it from the old folks, people who were raised in the 50s and the 60s, early 60s, people who were kids at that time. They grew up and they carried some of that older language with them. And so they would say things like, much obliged, if you held the door open for them or assisted them in some way. Much obliged, young man. But it is going away. And maybe the new aristocracy, the new nobility will bring that back around.
This is the turn of the tide right here. You're seeing it firsthand.
Check for Tunnel says, I don't know how closely they follow any flag code the way they lower the flag for just about anybody. Pretty sure they lowered flags in Texas when Tina Turner died. Oh, God save us. Tell you what. I mean, it did get wild there under Biden. It seemed like we were lowering the flag for every Tom, Dick, and Harry. Bill accidentally ran over his wife's favorite dog in the driveway, so put the flags at half mast for a month and a half. It was really bizarre, really bizarre. Check for Tunnel says, I would say Cincinnatus was right for stepping away because that's what was expected of him as dictator. He honored the deal everyone agreed to. They were all in error for republicanism. Yeah. So the idea that, Cincinnatus did the right thing by coming back and by stepping away, but it's because he was following, as it were, the covenant of his leadership. That's a good take. That's a good take.
So really, I've got a question.
Mm-hmm.
When the Reds play the Cardinals, is this like a battle of kings here that we have going on? Like, I've never made that connection before, but that's the cities that are.
Yeah.
Are there any other city? Now I'm thinking, like, what other cities would fall in that category named after kings?
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, I don't follow sports much, but I know that there's several Alexandrias. So probably one of them has a sports team. And then I don't know.
As an Ohio boy, I can say nothing good about the Cardinals, though I will say many good things about St. Louis, the man.
There you
go. Sure. There you go. There you go. All right. Well, Chris Hookins says, evening, gents. Very cool to see BJ Newman on the show. Always the best. Yeah. It's good.
Thanks, brother.
Good to have him along. We like to grab interesting people that we've run into in our lives. It would be cool to have super famous people on the show. But one thing that I've noticed is a lot of really good things get overlooked because the guy saying it is otherwise, unremarkable. And not in a bad way, but in a good way. Like, there's no drama about these guys. Right. They're just living their life in an understanding way, doing really well at what they do. And, they don't make the headlines, but they're the best people on God's green earth. All right. Well, that's it on the comment side. So I wanted to get into just running down some of the comments that were put under your Facebook post. And there were a few that Sean mentioned as well. But, we've got Lacobos saying, kingship was a better system. And
oh, man, this guy.
Paul Pereil is a good dude. But I find I disagree with him a lot these days. But I still really like him. But, his take on this is, noblesse oblige is no different than what we have today. The ruling class is extremely generous to the poor, and the poor are supposed to bootlick loyally. Now, I had some pushback on this particular point he made. The ruling class is extremely generous to the poor. And it kind of goes to something that Sean said in the show prep, where he said, are the ruling class maybe not obliged to the ruled because they aren't of the founding stock anymore? And, what he says, the ruling class is extremely generous to the poor, and the poor are supposed to bootlick loyally for it. The poor that the ruling class rewards are never seemingly the deserving poor. You notice that it's always the unemployed gangbanger with 10 baby mamas and 14 kids who he never sees and never pays child support for. That's the person, or the women, the aforementioned women that he has liaisoned with, or with whom he has liaised, that are receiving this support. It's never, poor, working class, employed people living in trailer parks, just trying to make ends meet. They're never the people who are receiving the help. But it's not just the ruling class. You see this with churches too, right? Churches seem to want to send all of their missionary funding and support, literally gallons upon gallons of food being sent overseas to lazy people in foreign countries who won't work for their food, while people just down the street are struggling to get by. And it's this kind of this inhuman aspect of charity where, I'm not going to be literally charitable to the people who I actually know, who I actually deal with. I'm going to, delegate that to some foundation that's going to go do that with cameras flashing so that I get good street cred halfway across the world. But I would say that Noblesse Oblige doesn't look like that at all.
No.
It's practically the opposite of that, because the people to whom you are obliged are the people, like the parable of the Good Samaritan. Your neighbor is the person right in front of you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think so. What stuck out to me on this comment that I think is telling is that he describes the lower rank honoring the higher rank as bootlicking. Mm-hmm. So I think that gives the game away here. I mean, I don't know what he has in mind, but that's not what we're talking about.
Well, he's kind of a Randian.
Oh, extremely so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is this better? Is that better for y'all? Or are y'all not seeing anything different?
No, I got it here. I mean, so on one hand, there is a way to do leadership poorly, but there's also a way to do, the subordinate role poorly as well. Mm-hmm. And right now, what we have is really just a toxic brew of me and you are going to partner to plunder them. That's what we have, right? You look at what's happened in Minnesota. Political leaders and local business leaders are partnering with Somalians to bring them over and plunder the state treasury. That's exactly what they're
doing. And if you interfere, you're the bad guy, because they all know what time it is. It's plunder time.
Yeah.
Right. The empire is falling and it's time to plunder, and you're getting mad because people are plundering instead of just plundering. Right. Their whole attitude is, hey, man, what's the big deal? We're just doing what we're supposed to be doing. It's the thing to do, and you're getting in the way.
Yeah, that's right. Now, under a system that is healthy and rational, what you would want is in the same way that you would want your children to be grateful to the parents who've provided for them, educated them, taught them, and loved them. You would want them to be able to give an appropriate amount of honor to their parents and to brag publicly on their parents and to be able to tell their parents verbally, hey, I really appreciate what you've done for me. Mm-hmm. We should be able to do the same thing for our leaders.
Right. Yeah.
I love coaching baseball. And at the end of every year, I inevitably get parents that come over and do something like that. And it makes me want to go do it better. It makes me want to go coach again next year. That's sort of the fuel that drives this engine. And it's a good, healthy dynamic where a coach does well for the players do well for the coach, right? What he's describing is a very transactional approach to things. Mm-hmm. And it's not biblical at all, because biblical relationships are covenantal and personal. And there are definitely business relationships in the Bible, but we also have to recognize the covenantal relationships we have with one another. And you would just never describe honoring your covenant as bootlicking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something that I do have to make one correction with something that Jeff just had said, where you had said that in the show prep that I had said that foreigners don't have this obligation because they are not our people. What I had said was they don't feel as if they have this obligation.
Right. And that is a distinction, because if they are nobility. I mean, you see this too. King George was a Hanoverian, right? He was not an Englishman, and yet the English loved him. And why did they? Because he was obliged to them. He loved the English. He was a Hanoverian, and he loved the English. And he ruled them actually very well. And he was a pretty good king, all things considered. I mean, he had some really bad parliaments that made things like the Revolutionary War happen, but he was really an excellent king. And, you don't have to have that blood tie to be a good nobility. We see this in nations all the time, where people will come in and they'll rule for a time, and they won't be blood related. And for a while, sometimes that works out, and then sometimes it doesn't. But what really makes the difference is if they feel like they have the obligation, if they feel like they have the duty to the people under them, and if they act on that, the people respond for the most part. I mean, it's like saying that, well, if you're the perfect husband, your wife will submit to you. It's like, well, yeah, some wives can't be pleased, right? Some nations, some people can't be pleased. I mean, if you try to rule Egypt and you're not Egyptian, eventually the Egyptians throw you out. It doesn't matter how good of a pharaoh you were, eventually the Egyptians get sick of non-Egyptians ruling them, right? But yeah, very, very good point there. Moving along to the comments here. This is something we mentioned briefly before, but Joshua Dermer says, this was brought to America via the Virginia aristocracy and by extension into the rest of the colonies and states, though the South retained it long after it died out in the North. The very concept of being an elite has been turned on its head, a perversity of power rather than a noble duty of privilege. And, if you've read books from the period, I've read several firsthand accounts of Civil War soldiers and people who lived in the antebellum South, but also a very good source is the book and movie Gone with the Wind. And
great movie.
It captures the fact that these really were gentry. They really absolutely were gentry in every single understanding of the word. And the war brought that to an end, right? It was destroyed. And I remember something in the preamble of that book talking about this book is dedicated to those knights of the South who were gone with the wind, right? That's what the title Gone with the Wind comes from. It says that aristocracy, that people, those nobility are gone with the wind. And so we had it here in the States. It's not a foreign thing. Native Americans, beware of foreign influence, right? Everybody's seen the flag there, right? Beware of foreign influence. This is not a foreign concept. This is something that our fathers lived under and thrived with. It's something that maybe we could bring back too if we operated with cool heads. Let's see. Is this the one? There was one that you mentioned, Sean. But
that is it's rather long. I had kind of summed up some of the points, but you could just kind of summarize. I think it's 2 points altogether.
I'll kind of roll through it kind of quick. But this is Josh Cooley. He says noble, talking about the ancient world, but medieval and ancient. I don't know how ancient he wants to go, but really it goes all the way back to the times of the flood. We are the historical exceptions here. He says nobles had wealth and power for a reason. It was not that people just one day decided, hey, let's give all the money, land, and power to that guy. That seems like a great idea. The reason nobility existed is because communities needed warriors to defend them. And in that area with that level of technology, it was much more effective to have a few well-armored, well-trained warriors than have a bunch of unskilled people with garden tools. So, this is a point that Sean was bringing up as well, kind of rolling off of this in the show prep. He's like, if you think about it, who were the people who went to war? It wasn't the peasants.
Nope.
As a matter of fact, that didn't really happen historically until Napoleon, which is extremely recent. Okay, this is 1890s that we're talking about. This is all right, just a little over 100 years ago was the first time in history that you had these massed draft movements of peasantry, arming them with sufficiently technologically robust materials that they can be quickly trained and drilled into effective soldiers.
If you're referring to Napoleon's a lot earlier in 1890.
Sorry, 17. No, hold on. 18. No, 8. Sorry, 1809.
There you
There
go.
we go. Yeah. Well, it's funny.
I am dyslexic. My apologies.
Jeff, it's interesting that you bring up the French during that time. So you're exactly right. Part of noblesse oblige was that the leaders would be willing to go die for their people, leading the armies into battle, that kind of thing. Very much, again, it's the fatherhood. I'm the one who's going to be the protector of this land.
Right.
But during the French Revolution, right before, right before Napoleon, we see a real clash that occurs during the French Revolution. So most people fail to realize that the French Revolution was not a popular uprising across the nation. It was a bunch of radicals in Paris that took over the central government. Now,
and then spread out like a spider throughout the country and killed anybody who opposed it.
Yes. Now, the reason they were able to spider out so far is because the practice of noblesse oblige, or the goodness of the leadership, was getting pretty crusty at that point. So King Louis XVI was probably the better of the bunch. He just didn't have the steel spine it took to fight against this. But there was one region in particular where this leadership subordinate dynamic worked really well, and it's called the Vendée region, Vendee, if you want to look it up. Now, they were the ones who provided the greatest resistance to the French being taken over. And the reason they did so is because the local nobles there were actually good nobles. So the nobles lived on the same land as the peasants. They intentionally kept rents down low so that it wasn't like exploiting their own people. They were the first ones to fight. There was a deep religiosity there. Of course, it was Catholic, French Catholic, but all of the priests were locals. They were, native sons. So when these radicals in Paris say, hey, we need the priests to sign this thing that we approve of you, they were like, get the hell out of here. What do you,
this is our priest and we don't know you.
That's right. Yeah. Now, of course, they forced it on them. And so they removed some of their priests and brought in some from the outside, and it created trouble. And then when war finally did break out, they conscripted a bunch of these Vendéans, and they were like, we're not fighting for you. Our loyalties are to these guys. And so it's sort of a late Christian Europe example of, the lesser magistrate kind of thing. It's like, okay, this king, right? Because a lot of the histories of the French Revolution paint that war in the Vendée region as like pining for the days of monarchy. And they're like,
as if it were a done thing, and they've just got gold-rimmed glasses on history.
Right. Yeah. And they were like no.
Like the Israelites in the wilderness, like, let's go back to slavery in Egypt. And they try to paint it in that light when it was a functional system that was still extant within their milieu.
That's exactly right. And the people who went to fight for the Vendéans against the radicals in Paris were all the nobles. Many of the people that died were nobles. And then after that battle, they even gave money and stipends to widows and families of their peasants that died. So, it's like even into the late 1700s, you see this clash of radical liberalism in Paris with the old world in this particular region. And you just say, if I had the choice to choose between those two, let's leave the guillotine wielders out of history. I'll take the old school guys.
Yeah. And, Napoleon is an interesting character because even though he had a lot of these liberal ideas, one of the reasons I think he was so successful is, he was not, in my opinion, and I'm not an expert on this, but I don't think he was a military genius in the way people understand military genius. He was a logistics genius, and he was a genius of rulership, and he was a leader of men. Nobody can doubt that. But his tactics were rudimentary, right? They weren't complicated. Wellington was a much more complicated and interesting tactician than Napoleon ever was. But Wellington had to work a lot harder for his wins because he had a much smaller army. When you've got the whole mob of Paris, you can just launch them. but he had these liberal ideas about equality, liberty, but he was able to marry these to this kind of idea of, your duty to me as emperor, my duty to you as your leader. He kind of, in a way, understood noblesse oblige,
Yes.
at least as it pertained to himself, right? He knew that he had obligations to his people, and he actually sought to fulfill those. And that's why in his rulership, the radicals of Paris called him the betrayer of the revolution.
Yep.
Is
Yep.
because he did feel obligation to the people whom he loved. Napoleon, for all of his humanistic faults and all of his atheistic nonsense, the man truly loved his people. And he felt that love to such an extent that he was willing to sacrifice himself for them, which ultimately he did.
Yeah.
And
I'm not quite
as well, but I mean, it was a selfish bargain, but
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not quite as upbeat about Napoleon, because what started us down this conversation was, you said this is where masses of the peasants started becoming the fodder for the war machine, and he did that badly.
Yeah.
And he would even do it sometimes for like very impulsive and irrational reasons. Like one time he was reading a book on Roman history, and he saw, Roman armies go down into Egypt and gain all, I think it was Julius Caesar. I can't remember who he was reading. And then he got it in his head. Let's go to
Egypt.
And he detoured all the way down there, got his butt handed to him.
Yeah,
and
did nothing, lost an entire army. Yeah.
I mean, the only
Fired
good
cannons
thing,
at the Sphinx.
yeah, I mean, so
why?
yeah, so I mean,
I don't know.
I mean,
but he found the Rosetta Stone.
that is true. Now, as a guy who has been a linguist in the military and speaks multiple languages, I am happy to hear that for sure.
Yeah, well, I mean, the British would have found it if he didn't. So, I mean, it would have.
Perhaps,
it was going to be safe anyway.
Can I say?
Yeah.
I got to say something on Napoleon. First of
Go
all,
ahead.
Jeff, all war is logistics. Okay.
Yes.
So
yes,
to
exactly.
be a logistics genius is to be a tactical genius.
There's a difference between tactics, though. I mean, like.
Well, but let me. Okay. Well, let me put this. Well, I'll put this in your own backyard, real quick. Okay.
Okay.
The Confederacy did not lose because of tactics. Confederacy lost because of logistics.
Mm-hmm.
It was a war of attrition because the Confederacy cannot win the war of logistics. At least all modern war is of logistics.
Yep.
And I have that in my head as a quartermaster veteran, I guess. That was a big. I remember it.
Yeah.
I remember this slogan when you would go into the de-facto of it, and it would say, "No war is lost because of logistics." Like I don't remember if that was the exact way they said it, but I remember thinking like, well, that doesn't make sense because plenty of wars are lost.
Yeah, every war is lost because of logistics.
But I think what they were intending to say is like, we vow to not be the reason we lose a war. Like we can lose a war because of, whatever superior technology on the other side or whatever, but we will be logistically sound. We will be the reason or we will not be the weak link in this chain. So as far as when you say like, oh, he was a logistics genius, what I hear is he was a military genius. Because that, if you don't have the logistics genius, like you don't have what it takes to run a line to the front lines. You know what I mean? Like you can do all your tactics perfect and then strand your guys out in Russia in winter. But unless you got your logistics down, those guys are going to starve.
Yeah.
So
I
just had to say that real quick. Also, with
the biography of an Irish rifleman in the Napoleonic Wars, one of the Green Jackets, and one of the things he talked about was just watching the French just come wave after wave into the musket fire, just seemingly never stopping. And he said, there's nothing incredible about the tactics here. It's just a numbers game. I've got 200,000 people on this battlefield, and you've got 17,000. You've got a hill, and you've got a bunch of cannons. But eventually, I'm just going to walk over you because I can. And that was a lot of Napoleon's strategy. It was just, I've got the numbers, I've got the logistics, I've got rifles, I've got powder, I've got food.
Well, but that's what I'm. Okay, but you could do
Sherman,
that,
or not Sherman, but Grant. Grant was a student of Napoleon. It was, we're going to line these people up and just walk them into the meat grinder, and we're going to win on numbers.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if you have the numbers, use them is essentially the point. But so there was that. But also, as far as the obligation goes with Napoleon had famously said, I'm going to butcher it, but he didn't speak in English anyway, so I'm paraphrasing regardless. He had said, like, I didn't steal the crown. I found it in the gutter and I picked it up.
And I picked it up with my sword.
Yeah. So the crown was just laying there. Like, essentially, he felt the obligation to go pick up that crown.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I have to somebody has to pick it up, and none of you idiots is doing it. So I feel obligated. Like, I have to go do it. And for that reason alone, if no other, I admire what Napoleon did in that regard. Because obviously, French Revolution did not end in anything good. And he stepped in and said, "Nah, I'm gonna go ahead and take that crown back."
Yeah.
So
those
are my two rants.
The only way the French Revolution could have ended is with a tyrant, whether it was Napoleon or somebody else. The radicals in Paris were just bloodthirsty, and somebody had to come in and say, the heads will stop rolling.
Yeah. Robespierre, put your head in the hole.
That's right.
Your machine will eat you. So the second point, and after this, I want to wrap it up with our own comments in the on the show comments. But the second point that who is this? Josh Cooley was making is, that the nobility were the people who went to battle themselves, put their own lives on the line for everybody else. And then, he makes the point that the pressure of survival was much, much higher than it is now. So only the most powerful and wealthy societies, like the Roman Empire, could afford to have a useless upper class. For everybody else, if your nobles were incompetent, it was likely your community would simply not survive. Basically, everyone had to pull their weight in order for anyone to survive. Food production technology of the time meant that a minimum of 80% of the population had to be farmers, maybe even up to 90%, simply in order to produce enough food. That meant that only a small percentage were able to be devoted to leadership, war, scholarship, or other similar cultural pursuits. Now, I don't know what the numbers were, but I have heard that they could have hovered around 80%. 80% of people were involved in producing food. Not necessarily they were all farmers, but they were farmers, they were millers, they were fishermen, they were cattlemen, they were hunters. 80% of the population, and then the rest of the 20% of the population gets divvied out between all of the, as it were, intellectual pursuits. Be they the monastery, the clerics, the religion, be they the rulers who are literally ruling the people, or other things, linguistics, trade, merchants. All of these things were being supported by that up to 80% of the population just producing food.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's truth to what he's saying. I think he perhaps overstates the case a little bit. But the reality is, if you ever want to build something beyond a sustenance existence, if you ever want to build higher art, higher literature, poetry, sculpting, architecture like we've seen in the past, then this hierarchy needs to remain in place to be able to accomplish any of those things. But as we're doing in the West, we're giving away our inheritance to resort back to a sustenance environment. And I know a friend of mine, Chris Wiley, has often said, as soon as things get hard, these natural orders of things revert back into place.
Yeah. Lesbianism disappears pretty quick.
These
once there's a war on,
Yeah, and so I mean, we're going to do the same thing. The question is, do we have the backbone? Do we have enough corporate will to say, you know what, let's not pour any more of this down the drain. Let's stop. Let's try to work through how to have a good aristocracy, a good leadership. And part of that means learning how to play your role well. One of my favorite verses in the Bible is one of the most misused. Paul says, submit yourselves to one another. And what he is often interpreted as saying is husbands and wives don't have genuine authority over each other, which is such a stupid misreading, because he just goes on to say, but what he is saying is very similar to what my lieutenant colonel said to me whenever I was in Iraq in 06 and 07. We'd just gotten in country. It was still very hot. And there were about 350 of us. And he said, play your role at your rank well. And what he means is we need all of you, and we need all of the roles that you're playing. And he was effectively saying, submit yourselves to one another. Do your job well at the rank where you're at. And I would love for us to be able to embrace that, not just in the home, but starting in the home, but in the church and in community and in the wider nation. And the better we do it, we'll start building colonies on Mars, because we'll be able to accomplish things at a higher level than we've ever even imagined.
Mm-hmm. There you go. All righty. Well, that sounds like a good place to wrap it up. Let's hop over to the comments. We just got a few, but let's see. Yellow Moth says, just got here. Happy New Year. Happy New Year, Yellow. Good to see you, man. Sir Vilder says, can't find out how to comment on my phone. Well, hi. Well, hello. But if you're having trouble commenting, take it up with the YouTube algorithm. I don't understand it, but we're happy to see you. Vilder, for those of you who don't know, he's a relation of mine. And, talking about obligation, he called me. It wasn't super early, but it was when I woke up, because I was up late last night. He called me as I was waking up this morning, and his car was broken down. And it was my job to go save him and bring him home.
That's right.
And the thing is, it can sometimes feel like, a burden. And it is a burden. It is a real burden. When the people to whom you are obliged call, it's never at an opportune time. Actually, today it was, because it's my day off. I wasn't doing anything anyway. But, these people will call you for help. And you're the person they need to help. They've got no other option.
Yeah.
When they're calling you, it's because they've run out of options. It's because they know that you're the person who can get it done. And you need to go. If you are obliged to that person, you need to go. And if the only way that we're going to establish an aristocracy is by having men who are not afraid to go, who are willing to go, and see that as an opportunity for growth. If you embrace each and every time that they call on you as an opportunity for growth, men will flock to you. Men will follow you.
That's exactly right.
Because they need the leadership. So anyway, Vilder, good to see you. Check for Tunnel says 1790s. Yeah, the number, the date in my head was 1809. 1790s would have been the revolution.
Yeah.
He would have been there. He was around, but he wasn't in charge until the 1800s proper.
Yeah, correct. I went and Googled that just to make sure as soon as I seen that pop up.
Yeah,
I know you were saying you wanted to.
My bad side. Yeah, final thoughts, Sean.
I know that you wanted to wrap up, but I'm just going to shotgun these because I know you want to wrap this up.
Go ahead. Oh,
yeah. The benefit that leadership or nobility gets is like they get to make the decisions, right? Like that's the big benefit. And it feels in those moments when they're the one making the big decision, like, oh, I wish I would have been the guy in that moment. But
I
nobody
wish I was
wants
the
to
guy
be
sitting on the throne, right?
right. But the vast majority of those people saying that don't want to be that guy the other 364 days of the year.
Yeah.
Right. So that's one of the benefits of not being the nobility is you don't have to be that guy at all times, every time there's some small decision or some other big decision or whatever. And so that I think it's interesting because I'm curious, like what is the other side of the coin to noblesse oblige is like what is the obligation of the peasantry, as it were. Like what would you say? Because I can give examples. Like another one that I was saying is a lot of people today, like we were saying, that in the capitalist system we have now, that the issue is that a lot of the lower classes will push the obligation in the other direction. So it's not so much like the nobility feeling, like God is telling me I have this obligation toward you, but it's the lower classes saying you owe me this. Does that make sense? Like I guess it's still the same kind of obligation, but it's being pushed from the wrong direction.
Well, I would actually argue that when this is done well, they can make a claim on the leadership. Now, they can't just whine and be like immature teenagers and say, oh, you're not giving me enough grain or something, like, which of course happens. But there is a sense, think of a father who neglects to provide for his children. His children can rightly say, Dad, this is your job. You're supposed to do this for me, right? And so I think there is a sense in which those who are subordinates can make claims on the duties of their superiors. And again, I think that works at all levels, right? If I'm a baseball coach and I show up 10 minutes late and I haven't hired an umpire, the players can say, Coach, you failed. Like, you let us down. And you're the wrong one. So we would want to sort out the specifics of what those obligations and duties are. And under difficult circumstances, I think this is where the leadership really needs to be wise. You can blast through reserves in a famine and ruin the next year of life, and there may be times that a king has to decide, am I going to go to war or not? Is it wiser to try to push the ball down the field, or should we go ahead and go to war? So those are the tough calculus decisions that an aristocracy has to make. And what the peasantry owes them is respect and honor and obedience within that, and loyalty within that realm of authority. That's right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, also too, talking about laying claims, this is something that you'll just read in passing sometimes in books where, somebody will bring a goose, to the Lord, and he'll be like, here, I just brought by this goose, thought you would like it. By the way, while I'm here, I'd like to talk about my son. I would really like it if he could get into this guild over here. Could you put in, would you talk to so-and-so and see if that could happen? And of course, he's the Lord. If he says, hey, Miller's son is going to be your apprentice now, it's going to happen, right? But he's also playing the game of politics, where he goes to his Lord and he says, hey, here's a gift from me to you to remind you of my many years of service to you. By the way, could I get something in return? Here's what I would like. And it's a very common thing to see throughout history. It's not uncommon at all, but it doesn't often make the history books because it's so common. It's like, I watched a 3-hour-long video. Actually, I listened to it, really, but a 3-hour-long video about the history of beds. And one of the points the guy made is that, you never hear about beds. Everybody's got one. The majority of people throughout history have slept on beds for the majority of their life, but you never hear about them because they are too commonplace. It's not like the history of toilets, right? It's not they're dirty. It's just that everybody's got one. And so it was an interesting video talking about the technology, the development, but it's like one of those things where something can be so commonplace that everybody takes it for granted, and you don't have anybody sitting down and writing down a treatise of what are the obligations of peasants to noblemen and noblemen to peasants until the advent of liberalism, where it is no longer the common thing.
Yeah, I mean, one of the interesting things that came up in the comments section is I had a couple people basically saying like, "Oh, this is a mythical reading of the past. Didn't really exist that way." And
Yeah.
I just was kind of baffled. I was like, there are literally like legal documents saying, "King, you are not upholding your end of the deal here."
Right.
Like, I don't know what to do with folks that just will deny that kind of reality. And it was just funny to me.
Yeah. All right, keep going,
Yeah.
Sean.
I've got a video that was actually brought up recently in Jeff, one of our chats, was a guy talking about African language, and he had mentioned that there was no word in whatever language it was for obligation. I want to say it was like Swahili or something like that. And so when English speaking people came to their country, they invented a word, and they essentially took two words together. And not Swahili, what was it? Zulu? Maybe it was Zulu, not Swahili. I always say Swahili because of George.
Sounds like the German thing to do, so it must have been one of the places.
But it was
the Dutch.
Yeah. But it was I always say Swahili because of George of the Jungle.
Right.
Because that's the language that those guys spoke. Like, so anyway, it was some African language. I want to say it was Zulu or something like that. But he had said they didn't have a word for obligation, and so they had to come up with one. And essentially the compound word they had come up with was to bind one's feet. But the guy giving the speech about this was saying, well, that's not an obligation. Like, that's an obligation is a mental thing. It doesn't exist in the
physical
outside world. Yeah, it's not a physical thing. Like, if you bind somebody's feet, they're not giving you an obligation. They're physically restraining you. Like, that's not exactly the same kind of thing. And so all that to say that obligations are it's a high IQ idea.
It's an abstract.
Yeah, it's abstract to reality. Like, it's something that only exists in the mind. It's not something that exists like I can hold, can I borrow your obligation real quick? Like, you can't do that. So all that to say, like, there's going to be people who are like, I don't get it. I don't understand obligations. I only understand capitalism because coins equal this thing. And so sometimes you're going to talk with people about this concept, and they're not going to get it because they're low IQ people, and they don't understand that these things have to exist for society to get to the levels that Western society has brought them to.
That's an interesting point you make too about IQ, because if you think about the countries with the highest obligation, what countries are they? They're, Oriental nations, China, Japan, Korea. And what are the countries in the world with the highest IQ? China, Japan, Korea. It does seem to track that way. That there is an abstract element, but it's not limited to that either, because I don't think that even in the most primitive tribe, they don't have the concept of an obligation of a parent to their child. They might not have a word for it, but everybody knows that if a mother doesn't feed her child, that she's doing something wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to chime in on that. I do think that the sense of duty and obligation that was on display society-wide in Christian Europe and has existed in other places as well, is something that is natural and universal to all humanity. Now, the particular way they articulate it, how it's manifested, that kind of thing, is going to vary from nation to nation, I think. And it's going to be more robust in a more robustly Christian or Christianized kind of culture, because it's spelled out explicitly in Scripture, and our entire Christian history is filled with it. But the fact of the matter is, I think it is common to man in some degree or another, whether it's I do think there's a temptation, whether it's culturally or IQ or whatever, to resist these obligations. I think that's what we're doing in the West on a widespread scale. It's like, I don't want to take care of these other people. I want what I want. So I'm going to come up with a nice, intellectually sophisticated argument for why I don't actually have to take care of my parents when they're old or whatever.
It is Corbon. It is Corbon.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah,
so
it's lazy people can be some of the most creative.
Exactly right. Yeah.
I want to say Zoltan was the one who gave me that video. So if you can reach out to him, or if he's listening right now.
Well, he's commenting.
He had said what it is, but it would be helpful to actually listen to what the guy says, because it's hard to summarize what he was saying, like his time spent with native people, and it was a whole, I mean, it was like an hour thing that he did, but so it's hard for me to like give his entire argument. Another thing I want to say, you were talking about at like the very beginning, I think, what you would say, like you said, you wouldn't identify with capitalism, but I was trying to think of a way to say, so essentially what you're describing is markets, but with obligations. And I think that's a very intriguing idea, markets with obligations, because right now, the only obligations that people seem to think, at least in current American capitalism, is the legal obligations, which,
obligations
those are
to shareholders.
Yeah, like those will be,
but not obligations to customers or employees, but obligations to shareholders.
Yeah, like you'll face consequences for not upholding those obligations, but there's no moral failing in their minds that they've done if they're not if they don't do these obligations. Like, for instance, keeping the environment clean in general, right? I mean, there's people who act like the worst Captain Planet villain that you can imagine. I'm gonna dump raw sewage in the local river to save 10 cents a gallon, or whatever crazy thing. You know what I mean? Like, it's some absurd thing that, in the 80s you would have thought, oh, that's silly. Who would have done that? But, now people do, or, that train that derailed and put like vinyl into the air around Ohio, I think.
East Palestine. Yeah.
Yeah. Like it just like crazy things like that, like where it was obvious negligence on some level. So I guess I'm just saying, like, that's kind of, to me, seems to be the answer to, it's not like I hate markets, I hate free markets or whatever. It's I would like to insert obligations into that.
Yes.
It's not just a matter of how much you could take advantage of somebody.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I would definitely want to say I'm a free market guy. Like, I'm strongly free market because it's efficient. Everything that the government says we need is really expensive, and everything like TVs and pizza and T-shirts that the government says we don't need is really cheap. So right. I'm not blind here, but what I want to resist is making the idea that whatever the market demands is what is moral. Those two are not synonymous at all, because the market will push people in very immoral directions. And it's just the reality. The market is merely a reflection of the decisions by everyday humans. That's really what the market is. And humans are sinful. So what we're thinking about here, I'm not an economist. I'm not an expert in this area. But if we take financial obligation, if we take familial and cultural obligations seriously, it's going to be practiced in the financial side, right? I'm not going to go blow all of my money on gambling and whiskey because I need to take care of my kids, right? Now, if we're doing well, then I can give that money to other people and be insanely generous, right? But when it comes to people running businesses, governments acting in financial ways, if they're openly hurting people, then you have the moral duty to knock that off. And it may take us some time to like see that, but right, like, the same thing. Like, part of the reason I believe that the United States and the free markets of the the United States blew up was because we were, by and large, a very ethical people, a high trust society. And as we lose that ethical side, as we lose that high trust, the markets are going to reflect that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a lot of bad policy can be smoothed over by the Protestant work ethic.
Amen. That's right.
You can have really bad politicians doing really dumb stuff with the money, but if people are working hard because they believe it's the right thing to do, it can keep the economy afloat. That's not an endorsement of their bad policies. Right. It's just a byproduct of reality.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah. Jeff, you had mentioned, this is another topic, you had mentioned loyalty. One thing I would bring up in that is that in the English language, we make a big distinction between faith and loyalty. But really, there's a lot more overlap in those two concepts than I think most people realize. And you see it when you talk about like someone being faithful to their spouse. Well, really, you're just being loyal to that person. And so I think that when talking about like the loyalty that that nobles are to have to those under them, that really they're just acting in good faith, that they believe in something, which is also another etymologically connected word, belief and faith. Like you believe in the system, you're loyal to the system, you understand that this is something that God has ordained, and you have that obligation because of what God has this framework that God has put into creation. And so that was just a random thought that I had.
Well, and a good example of that in action, Sean, is the conversion of the first Christian nation, Armenia. The reason Armenia converted was because the king converted, and he was the beloved king. He was the father of the nation, and he was faithful to his people. And so he comes to them and says, hey, I've become convinced that Christ is Lord, and I want us to become a nation that honors Christ as Lord. And because there was trust and loyalty and this connection between the king and his people, they followed him. And that loyalty is so strong that if you talk to Armenians today, I've talked to a few of them, they'll still talk about their king that converted with just pride. And I just think we don't have a clue what that's like in the West.
Yeah, we had like a whole half an episode about King Olaf of Norway. He's the patron saint of Norway to this day.
Okay.
And he was like the first Christian king. He was at least the first Christian king to essentially convert the nation.
Oh, okay.
So he had some very interesting stories. Like my favorite one was where he was like going through the country for whatever reason, and he came to this house, and the house was still very pagan, and they had the sacred horse phallus that they would pass to each other in the house that was like a fertility thing, and it was his turn to receive it, and so he took it and threw it in the fire, and like that was his big, I'm converting this house by throwing the horse phallus in the fire. That one.
Why is it that every demonic religion, the rituals are literally humiliation rituals?
Yeah,
it's just like poop festivals and like, I mean, it's demons really hate people. Have you noticed that? It's just wild.
One last thought. I will make this very quick. I promise.
Sean, let me interrupt you real quick.
Yeah.
I did some quick searching. So I don't know what the timeline is between King Olaf and the Armenian king. I just looked it up. His name is Tiridates III. Mm-hmm. King Tiridates converted in 301, and it looks like I'm not sure about the dates on Olaf. Olaf seems to be a little bit later than that. So I don't have all the information in front of me, but
I would think he would have been quite a bit later than that.
Yeah. So I just always had it in my head that Armenia was the first nation to convert to Christianity. So,
yeah.
I'm a history nerd.
Yeah,
I had to get my dates.
It looks like roughly the year 1000 would be
okay.
the conversion of Norway. It's way late in the game.
Well, it would take time to go through Germany up into the Scandinavian regions. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, the Germans were very resistant to Christianity for a very long time, and it took a while for it to make its way across the water into Scandinavia as well. So, I mean, it took some time to get there. Yeah.
Yeah. But speaking of Viking nations, a story I feel like I insert this as often as I can, but it's kind of the obligation in the other direction, perhaps. But the story of there was a man walking with a child in Denmark, as the story goes, whether or not it really happened. He was not of Denmark. He was not a Danish man.
He was an Englishman.
And so they're walking through, and the
He was an Englishman.
Oh, okay. Is that how it goes? And he, the boy that he's walking with says, "Hey, do you know who that is walking over there?" And he's like, "No, I don't know who that is." He says, "That's the king of all Denmark." And the Englishman said, "Where are all of his bodyguards if he's the king?" And the boy says, "All of Denmark are his bodyguards."
Oh, I love that.
And I think, that is the other side of the coin, I said, or maybe that is what is downstream of the obligation of nobles, is that your people will love you. You will, it goes both ways, right? You love your people love you. There's this old English idea of like having a portrait of your king or queen, right? Like in the Beatles song Penny Lane, the guy's got a portrait of the queen, right?
Yep.
Like, and that sounds so crazy to us as Americans, like, but in reality, like we've also, my father-in-law has a portrait of Ronald Reagan up in his coming full circle up in his office at his work. Like how, I mean, it's built into us. Like we do feel that obligation, and that obligation goes both ways.
A few years ago when the Queen of England died, and you saw the videos of the cabbies who lined the streets and just stood at attention next to their cabs the whole day, out of respect and honor for this woman who none of them ever met. None of them ever met her, and yet they had this deep, abiding love for her. And it's kind of sad, too, when you see it for her, because it was the last of an era.
Yeah.
Nobody loves Charles the way they loved her. Nobody does. They don't have respect for him the same way. They kind of grudgingly honor him as the king de facto, or de nom anyway. But there really was a love for Elizabeth that just isn't around anywhere. And I can't think of a place in the world where there is that kind of love for a monarch anymore.
Well, I think being able to create an environment like that would be a multi-generational project. Right. I mean, especially in our modern Western world, to be able to earn the trust of a people and to inculcate in the people the kind of virtue that would be necessary for such a thing. We're so far from that. Like, I mean, that feels almost like a fairy tale. It's almost heartwarming, right? That's why we love Good King Wenceslas, because we're like, I would love to live in a nation like that. But in order for us to be able to build something like that, we have to start with our own hearts. We have to love the Lord Jesus, and we have to learn how to just live that in our own little communities. And, by God's grace, we'll get there. But I like to say we have to know where the target is before we can, start moving in that direction. And what you just described about the King of Denmark, man, that kind of stuff is amazing.
Yeah. And the show wasn't about it, but we did talk about it with Ethan Holden. We had him on the show. We've had him on twice, but the first time we were talking about how to be a landlord, how to improve properties. And one of the things that he hammered on more than a few times in the show is that the people living in your houses have a need for you to take
Yes.
care of them.
That's right. That's right.
And that right there is where noblesse oblige can start.
Yes,
Because if
100%.
you are a landlord, if you own land, if you own property, you can, it's the parable of the Good Samaritan. Your neighbor is the person right in front of you. And if you own property and people live in that property, you have an obligation to them, whether you are fulfilling it or not, and whether they take advantage of it or not. You have an obligation to them, a very real spiritual and physical obligation to those people who are living under your roofs. And that's where noblesse oblige can begin, because we are living in a very liberal, very just abstract culture where a lot of these concepts have been murdered in the cradle. But you can be the change that you want to see in the world.
That's right.
Take the responsibility yourself for the people under your care.
And you will stick out like a sore thumb. You really will. I mean, as we were doing our church plant, this is going to sound like I'm bragging on myself. I'm not trying to, but as we went through our church plant, there were a lot of people coming in. Several of them had come from really difficult church backgrounds. Well, what about this? What about this? And several folks were just really worried about, well, how involved are you going to get into like my family?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm going to care for you, but like you're the father. I'm not going to run your house
Mm-hmm.
for you, And overwhelmingly, the response was like, I've never had a pastor who knew his bounds and seemed to really care about, I don't know. And I'm not anything special. It's not like I'm a magician over here,
Yeah.
It was just, I think what happened is that I encountered a bunch of people who had encountered a lot of bad pastors and were like, oh man. And when they saw somebody who was normal and had his head on straight, that they felt relieved. And so your point is, wherever you're at, just start doing it and you will draw people to you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just like the Army needs you to be the best that you can be in your role.
Yes.
Captains make very bad sergeants. Sergeants make good sergeants, and captains make good captains. Wherever you are, wherever God has you, be that to the people around you.
Amen.
Some might even say, be all that you can be.
I wouldn't say such a thing. But
all right, let's finish out with comments here. Check for Tunnel says, history of free serfs versus non-free serfs shows this. Men went to court and petitioned to become non-free serfs so they could pursue the obligations that they then earned. So serfs would seek a lord because there were things to be had. Servile loyalty is something which is lost now. People don't stay at a job for a long time because the upper echelons don't care for the employees.
That's right.
That's another example of noblesse oblige. If you are a boss with employees, you have an obligation to them.
Yes.
And your obligation is at least making sure that their wages keep up with inflation. Come on, guys. If you have employees, make sure their wages are keeping up with inflation. I know you're getting robbed, but that doesn't mean that you can rob your employees, okay? So, rough stuff out there, but truth bomb, guys, truth nuke. And talking about the history of beds, he says, there are a couple famous beds throughout history, yes, but not generally whole books written about it. Servile says, people who say things aren't like that and have never been often have never done any research into what it is they're discussing. Even good people will make that mistake. And Paul has been known to make that mistake. He's a good guy, but I do disagree with him. Servile talking about faithfulness versus loyalty. He says, faithfulness includes loyalty, in my perfect and never incorrect opinion. The point I was going to make, which I kind of forgot to make, was that in Latin, I don't believe there's a distinction.
Well, that's what I'm saying, yeah.
Fidelis means loyalty, and it means faithfulness. They are the same thing. To have faith in something is to be loyal to it. and to be disloyal to something is to not have faith in it.
Yeah.
They really are one and the same.
That could
All
be
right.
its own episode. I've got a lot to say
That
on that.
could be its own episode, but this episode has been its own episode, and we hit
Yes.
the 2-hour mark. So I tried to make it a little shorter, but it was just too good. It's too good. We had to keep going.
I really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah. But Pastor Newman, we really appreciate you coming on, and we pray that your voice will still be strong tomorrow when you're preaching the good word. And folks, tomorrow is a day that God has prepared for you to go worship Him in. So go to bed, get some rest, and I will see you at the table. Pastor Newman, thank you for coming along. We appreciate it. And to everybody, have a wonderful night.